They laughed at her in the boardroom, not knowing their empire had just died. The millionaire mocked her name, not realizing he had once begged her for help. One signature was about to erase generations of power. Rain fell hard on the cracked roads of a quiet Chicago suburb, the kind of rain that soaked through shoes and chilled bones and made people look away from a teenage girl named Eliza. Walked home from her evening shift at a diner, her backpack heavy with school books and leftover bread. Rolls she had been allowed to take home. Her clothes were thin and her hands were red from the cold, yet when she heard the sharp hiss of air escaping rubber, she stopped. An old luxury car sat crooked on the roadside, its hazard lights blinking weakly. An elderly man struggled with a jack, his hands shaking his coat too fine for this kind of weather. Most people passed without slowing down. Some glanced, then turned away. Eliza hesitated. She was tired, hungry, late, and scared, but something in the man's eyes stopped her fear, mixed with embarrassment and quiet despair. She stepped closer and asked if he needed help. He looked up, surprised, almost offended, then defeated, and nodded. The tire was shredded, the rain relentless. Eliza held the flashlight with her phone and followed his instructions, her shoes filled with water, her fingers numb, yet she did not complain when the jack slipped. She steadied it. When the lug nuts refused to move, she leaned her full weight and turned. Finally, the spare was on. The man tried to offer money, pulling a thick wallet from his coat. She shook her head, said she was just glad he was safe. He studied her face as if trying to memorize it. Asked her name, she told him. Asked his, he said, Henry, but nothing more. Before leaving, he pressed a small folded card into her hand, said, "If you ever need help, call me." She never did because life kept pushing forward. Her mother got sick. Hospital bills piled up. Eliza worked harder, studied at night, dreams shrinking day by day, until one winter morning the phone rang. A lawyer spoke her name. Carefully said an elderly client had passed away and left something for her. She thought it was a mistake. She almost hung up, but curiosity held her. She took a bus across the city to an office taller than any building she had ever entered. Marble floors, cold air, and silent stairs. The lawyer explained Henry Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Owlings, had left her shares in his company, not charity, not money, but ownership. She did not understand the scale until numbers filled the room. She walked out dizzy, terrified and silent. Years passed. She refused interviews, lived simply, learned quietly, studied business ethics, finance law. She watched the company from a distance, learned its rot, the cruelty at the top, the arrogance that crushed workers and families. When the board forced a restructuring, she finally acted. She entered the New York boardroom, wearing plain clothes, eyes steady, heart pounding. Executives sneered. The chairman, Victor Hale, laughed openly when she spoke. "Sir, I am the new owner." He called security until the lawyer placed the recent will on the table. Victor read the signature. His breath stopped. Memory struck him. The rain, the broken tire, the night he abandoned his driver and was forced to beg a poor girl for help. The room went silent as power shifted, and Eliza stood calm, knowing kindness had come home. The silence in the boardroom felt heavier than the rain-soaked night that had once bound Eliza and Henry together. Victor Hale sat frozen, his fingers trembling against the polished table. The other executives exchanged nervous glances. None of them had prepared for this moment. Years of unchecked power had taught them that authority was loud, arrogant, and untouchable. Yet the young woman standing before them spoke softly and carried no threat in her posture, only certainty. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read sections of the will, explaining how Henry Whitmore had quietly transferred majority ownership into a trust, naming Eliza as sole beneficiary upon her 25th birthday, a date that had passed 2 weeks earlier. Victor tried to interrupt, his voice cracking as he demanded audits, recounts, anything that could delay the inevitable, but each objection collapsed under legal precision. Eliza listened without expression, remembering the long nights she spent studying corporate law, understanding this world so she would never be crushed by it. The board members who once celebrated layoffs and bonuses now felt sweat gather under their collars. The lawyer finished and closed the folder. The room belonged to her now. Victor finally stood, forcing a laugh that echoed hollowly, and offered congratulations. Extending a hand she did not take, she asked instead about employee wages, factory safety, and the overseas subsidiary that had been fined quietly for environmental damage. Victor blinked, confused, unprepared for moral questions in a room built for trees. And we built for Prophet Eliza asked again, slower this time, and something in her voice made answering unavoidable as Victor spoke. Excuses spilled, decades of neglect surfaced. Eliza nodded, not in anger but resolve. She spoke of Henry, the man they never truly knew. How he once believed companies should protect people. How he had lost his way after Victor took control. How kindness was replaced by fear. She told them about the rainy night, not as a weapon, but as truth. How a powerless girl helped a powerful man. And expected nothing. How that moment reminded him of who he was meant to be. Some executives looked down, ashamed, others skeptical, yet listening. Eliza announced immediate changes, audits, transparency, restored wages, and the creation of a fund for families harmed by company negligence. Victor exploded, shouting that she was naive, that mercy would bankrupt them. Eliza turned to the lawyer and quietly asked for the resignation letters prepared in advance. Victor stared, shocked, realizing she had planned every step. Security escorted him out, his empire gone, not with violence, but with paperwork and memory. In the days that followed, news spread slowly, then erupted headlines. Mocked, then questioned, then admired employees waited for disappointment, but instead received raises, safety improvements, and respect. Eliza refused a corner office, choosing a simple desk among others, walking the floors, learning names. Listening stories. She remembered her mother, the hospital bills, the fear of being unseen. And she made a vow that no one under her leadership would feel invisible. Kindness did not make her weak. It made her unstoppable. And somewhere in the city, rain began to fall again, not as punishment, but as quiet reminder that even the smallest act can outgrow steel and stone. The aftermath of the boardroom upheaval rippled through the company like an earthquake, yet Eliza moved through it with quiet patience. She spent her first weeks listening more than speaking, sitting with factory workers in break rooms, walking through warehouses, breathing in dust and oil, hearing stories no report had ever captured, injuries hidden to protect supervisors. Overtime, unpaid promises, broken names, forgotten. She wrote everything by hand, late into the night, not because technology failed her, but because writing slowed her thoughts and anchored her purpose. Managers resisted at first, calling her idealistic, predicting collapse, but profits did not fall. Instead, morale rose, efficiency followed, and something rare returned: trust. Eliza implemented profit-sharing education grants, healthcare coverage for part-time staff. The numbers surprised even the skeptics. Kindness, once seen as weakness, became strategy. Competitors scoffed until talent began leaving their firms for hers. Victor Hale watched from a distance, bitterness consuming him. Lawsuits, failed investigations turned nothing. The will was airtight. His memory of the rainy night haunted him, not because he was wronged, but because he remembered the man he once could have been. Meanwhile, Eliza avoided the spotlight, declining interviews, living in a modest apartment, visiting her mother's grave on quiet Sundays, telling her stories of a life that still felt unreal. One evening, she received a letter, handwritten, shaky, familiar. Henry had written it years before his death, sealed and forgotten. Until now, in it, he spoke of regret, of building walls too high, of losing friends, family, humanity, until a flat tire and a girl in the rain reminded him that power means nothing without decency. He wrote that he did not choose her because she saved him, but because she did not ask for anything in return. Reading the letter, Eliza wept, not for wealth, but for connection. Months later, the company held its first open forum. Employees, from janitors to engineers, stood and spoke freely. Applause replaced fear. Eliza closed the meeting with simple words: we rise together or not at all. The room stood united outside. Rain tapped the windows gently, no longer a symbol of struggle, but of growth. And somewhere in the city, a forgotten kindness continued to bloom, shaping futures far beyond one empire. As seasons changed, the transformation of Whitmore Holdings became impossible to ignore. Industry analysts scrambled to understand how a company once infamous for ruthless cuts now outperformed rivals without sacrificing its people. Eliza remained. Unmoved by praise, she spent early mornings reviewing reports and late evenings answering letters from employees and strangers. Alike, some wrote to thank her, others to ask for help. And she answered as many as she could, believing leadership began with listening. A single mother wrote about choosing between medicine and rent. Eliza quietly arranged support without publicity. A veteran injured on the job feared termination. Eliza met him personally and rewrote policy the board, once hostile, now sat attentive, learning a new language built not on fear but accountability. Victor Hale attempted a public comeback, claiming he had been betrayed, yet evidence of his abuses surfaced. Whistleblowers empowered by the new culture spoke freely. Investigations followed, and his legacy crumbled. Eliza did not celebrate his fall. She believed justice needed no audience. She focused instead on building something that would outlast her. She established apprenticeships in the same Chicago neighborhoods she once walked through in the rain. Scholarships carried no branding, only opportunity. One afternoon, during a visit to a small repair shop, she noticed a teenage girl holding a flashlight while an old mechanic struggled with a tire. The image froze. She smiled quietly, understanding the circle of things. She spoke to the girl afterward, offered advice, not money, and left behind a card much like the one Hine once gave her, saying, "If you ever need help, call me." Months later, profits soared, but more importantly, lawsuits vanished, injuries dropped, retention soared. Analysts finally admitted something unprecedented: kindness scaled. Eliza stood at her office window, watching rain trace lines down glass, remembering cold shoes, numb fingers, and a moment that changed everything. She whispered, "Thank you," to a past version of herself and to a stranger who believed enough to pass the torch forward. Time tested Eliza in ways applause never could. Success invited pressure. Politicians sought endorsements. Investors pushed for shortcuts. Media hunted for scandals. She learned quickly that power did not always arrive with cruelty. Sometimes it arrived wearing smiles and promises, and she guarded her values fiercely. She refused deals that exploited weaker markets. Even when numbers tempted the board, she shut down a profitable subsidiary when evidence showed it poisoned water in a foreign town. Choosing repair over revenue, critics called her reckless. Stockholders panicked for weeks. Yet when cleanup began and trust returned, long-term growth followed, proving again that conscience could coexist with capitalism. Eliza traveled often, not in luxury but with purpose, visiting factories, schools, hospitals, funded by the companies. She listened to children describe futures that once felt impossible to them, and she saw pieces of herself in every hesitant dream. During one visit to Chicago, she walked the same street where the flat tire incident had happened years earlier. The diner was gone, replaced by a clinic funded anonymously by Whitmore Holdings. She sat on a bench as rain began to fall, light, steady, familiar, and she allowed herself to remember hunger, fear, and the quiet bravery of stopping when others passed by. She realized then that kindness was not a single act but a habit, one that had to be practiced daily, especially when inconvenient. Back in New York, a crisis erupted. A market crash sent panic through the board. Emergency meetings stretched into sleepless nights. Advisors urged mass layoffs to stabilize numbers. Eliza listened, then asked one question: what happens to families when spreadsheets survive, but people do not? Silence followed. She proposed an alternative: temporary executive pay freezes, voluntary reduced hours, and transparent communication with workers. The plan was risky, unprecedented, but the workforce responded with loyalty, innovation, and sacrifice. Productivity held. The storm passed, and the company emerged intact, stronger, bonded by shared survival. Analysts later called it the Whitmore miracle. Eliza called it trust. Meanwhile, Victor Hale faced trial. His former allies vanished. Sentences were handed down quietly. He sent Eliza a letter from prison filled with bitterness and regret. She read it once, then filed it away, believing closure did not require forgiveness, only understanding. She focused forward, expanding education initiatives, mental health programs, and ethical leadership training, insisting every manager learn the story of the rainy night not as legend, but as lesson. On the anniversary of Henry Whitmore's death, Eliza addressed the company, standing not on a stage but among them. She spoke of a man who lost his way and found it again because someone helped. Without asking why, she reminded them that every interaction held weight unseen, and that empires were not built by steel or money, but by moments of humanity. Multiplied over time, rain fell outside, soft, steady, as if the world itself was listening. Years passed, and Eliza matured into a leader, studied across universities. Her methods debated, her results undeniable, yet she never allowed herself to become distant. She still rode public transport on quiet days, still answered unknown numbers, still kept the folded card Henry once gave her tucked inside a book as a reminder not of wealth but of responsibility. The company expanded globally, but with strict ethical charters. Local leadership, community oversight, and open books. Employees spoke with pride, not fear. Children of workers attended colleges once unreachable. Entire neighborhoods shifted because one corporation chose not to extract but to invest during a global crisis when supply chains collapsed. Competitors hoarded resources. Whitmore Holdings shared technology and support, stabilizing markets and earning trust. Governments later returned tenfold. Investors finally understood that integrity compounded. Eliza declined awards, requesting instead that recognition go to teams and communities. She avoided the word legacy, believing it invited ego, yet her impact grew undeniable. One evening, she received a call from the same law firm that once summoned her years earlier. An elderly woman had passed, leaving a small inheritance and a note naming Eliza as reason. The woman wrote that years ago she had been helped quietly by a Whitmore program when no one else cared, and that kindness gave her dignity. Eliza sat in silence, understanding the echo of Henry's choice. The circle widened. Again, she established a foundation, not bearing her name, but a simple phrase: kindness lights guiding principles into schools and leadership programs worldwide, teaching that power without empathy decays from within. Victor Hale watched news reports from his cell, seeing a world he could no longer touch, shaped by values he once mocked. His laughter in that boardroom, now a distant ghost, while Eliza prepared for a future where she would one day step aside, ensuring systems strong enough to outlive her. She mentored young leaders, reminding them that every decision, no matter how small, might one day return with consequences or grace. Rain continued to fall in cities across the world, touching countless strangers, each drop carrying the possibility of choice. The final chapter of Eliza's journey did not arrive with headlines or applause. It came quietly, the way rain does, soaking into the ground unseen, yet changing everything beneath it. Years after the boardroom laughter faded into history, Eliza stood on a modest stage inside a rebuilt community center in Chicago, the same city where her story began. Children filled the seats, their parents, teachers, workers, faces marked by lives once weighed down by struggle, now softened by hope. She was no longer introduced as owner or billionaire or visionary, but simply as Eliza. She spoke slowly, telling a story many already knew but needed to hear again. She spoke of a night when she was young and tired and poor and afraid, and how stopping to help a stranger felt insignificant at the time, how she never imagined it would ripple outward, touching thousands of lives. She reminded them that kindness rarely announces itself and almost never pays immediately. It waits, sometimes years, sometimes lifetimes before returning. She spoke of Henry Whitmore, not as a titan of industry, but as a flawed human who forgot himself and then remembered because someone treated him with dignity when he did not deserve it. She spoke of Victor Hale, too, not with hatred, but as warning that power without conscience collapses inward. Eventually, she described how systems change only when people do, and how every policy, every profit, every innovation must answer one question: who does this serve? After the speech, she stepped down and blended into the crowd, hugging former employees, students, beneficiaries, people who never knew her full story and did not need to. She had arranged everything for transition. Months earlier, leadership councils elected by workers' community, boards with real authority, transparent governance structures that no single person could corrupt. She believed strongly that goodness should never depend on one individual. The true measure of success was what survived after you stepped away. On her final day as CEO, she cleaned out her desk herself, placing the old folded card from Henry into a small wooden box along with her handwritten notebooks and the letter he wrote before his death. She left behind no portrait, no name etched in marble. Only a simple plaque near the entrance of headquarters that read, "Power fades, kindness remains." She moved back to Chicago, not into luxury, but into a quiet neighborhood. Near a park, she volunteered, mentored, tutored children who reminded her of herself. Carrying heavy backpacks and bigger dreams, sometimes she walked in the rain, deliberately, slowly letting it soak her shoes, remembering how cold she once was and how warm it felt to choose compassion over convenience. One evening, she noticed a young boy helping an elderly woman carry groceries across a flooded street. People rushed past, cars honked, impatience rising. Eliza smiled, understanding that the world did not change because of empires or wills or boardrooms. It changed because someone paused when it was easier not to. The boy finished helping, waved shyly, and ran off. Eliza never spoke to him, never gave him a card, never told him who she was. She knew better now. Kindness did not need witnesses. Years later, long after Eliza herself became a story told in classrooms and books, the systems she built continued. Thriving companies adopted similar models, communities strengthened leaders trained under the kindness lights principles, carried them into governments, schools, hospitals. A new generation grew, believing that success and empathy were not opposites, but partners. And somewhere in a different city on a rainy night, a flat tire hissed and a tired stranger stopped to help another without knowing why, and the world quietly shifted again, just a little, because real kindness always finds its way home.